This is the story of a terrifying encounter faced by a U.S. soldier during the Vietnam War. Story made by Cookie Monster. Please enjoy.
The day was sweltering hot, even for Vietnam, and sweat clung to my skin under all my gear. We'd been sent to check out a nearby village rumored to be hiding Viet Cong soldiers. Just the thought of it had us on edge. I was with my platoon, a solid group of guys, some barely out of high school like me, and we tried to keep things light with small talk, though it didn't do much to break the tension hanging over us. When we got close, the air changed. Everything went eerily quiet. Usually you'd hear some chickens clucking, maybe kids running around if the village wasn't empty. But here, just silence. It was as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. "Stay alert," Sergeant Lopez whispered, his voice low but sharp. We all knew what that meant. Something was off. As we walked further in, my boots crunched softly on the dirt path, and I noticed things that shouldn't have been there if the place was truly abandoned. There were pots left on stoves, some dishes still stacked nearby. Chairs were set around tables like folks had just stepped out for a minute and could come back any time. One of the guys, Harris, pointed out a pile of ashes in a fire pit near the center of the village. It was cool to the touch, but it looked fresh, like it had burned out only a few hours ago. My stomach tightened and I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. Yet, nothing moved except a loose piece of paper drifting across the ground.
Anyone else feel like we're being watched?
Murmurs ran through the squad, everyone too proud to admit they were spooked. But I knew we all felt it, that gnawing sensation of eyes on us, as if the jungle had grown its own gaze. And still, not a single soul in sight. I felt a chill, like the air had somehow dropped a few degrees. As dusk settled, we set up an outpost. The village had that haunted kind of silence, but we needed a position to support the forward platoons. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best we could do for the night. By the time darkness fully wrapped around us, everything looked different. Shadows crept into every corner, making the empty village feel alive and menacing. My heart pounded in my chest. The only sounds I could hear were our footsteps and the occasional muttered word. But then I started hearing other noises, small, fleeting sounds, just at the edge of my hearing. At first I brushed it off as the wind or the jungle playing tricks, but soon I realized it was chanting, low and faint, like whispers floating on the breeze. I told myself it was just nerves, but something felt very wrong, and when I looked around I could tell the others felt it too. The noises grew louder, strange and unsettling. It sounded almost like voices, but garbled and twisted. Suddenly, a strange odor drifted over the camp. "What is that?" I thought. At first I didn't recognize it, but then it hit me. Rotting flesh. Then, as soon as the smell appeared, a shadow moved at the edge of my vision. I turned to look, but nothing was there. Then, just as quickly, something cold and dark seemed to pass right through me. My blood ran ice cold, and then, without warning, I saw it.
Tôi đói quá, bạn đâu rồi? Tôi muốn ăn, đừng chạy trốn, tôi sẽ tìm bạn.
It started as a blur at the edge of the darkness, just outside the glow of our flashlights. We squinted, weapons ready, and then the thing came closer. A head, just a human head, floating in midair with sunken, empty eyes that seemed to lock onto each of us. From below its neck hung a mess of guts, bloodied and hanging, swaying slightly as it drifted forward. The eyes, lifeless but staring directly at us, sent a chill straight down my spine. "What the hell?" someone whispered, but no one moved. We were frozen as if caught in the thing's stare. The head cried, then darted forward, sinking its teeth into one of the guys near me. He screamed, thrashing as blood sprayed. That was all it took. The rest of us opened fire, but nothing seemed to stop it. The bullets tore through it, but it only seemed to make the thing angrier. Another soldier fell, then another, each one going down with the same horrified look as the head lunged at them, biting and tearing into their flesh. After seeing a third guy go down, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran, hearing gunfire and screams as I sprinted through the village, my boots pounding against the ground. But in my panic, I tripped, crashing onto the ground and landing on a loose board. Beneath it, I saw a small, dark opening, the entrance to a Viet Cong tunnel. I didn't think twice, as the sounds of death and chaos filled the night air behind me. I squeezed myself down into the hole and just started crawling, disappearing into the earth just as everything above went silent. Inside, the muffled screams and gunfire faded. The tunnel felt like it went on forever. My hands were raw from crawling, my knees aching, but I didn't dare slow down. The walls were so tight that the air felt almost solid, pressing on me from all sides. My breathing was shallow, each gasp stirring up the smell of damp earth and the faint rot of something long dead. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of reaching the surface, getting away from that nightmare. After what felt like hours, I finally saw a small glimmer of light in the distance. Relief flooded over me, and I scrambled faster, dragging myself toward the exit until I broke through to the other side. I found myself at the edge of the jungle, not far from the base camp. The shadows of dawn were just starting to lift, and I made my way through the trees, stumbling and exhausted. Every step felt like I might collapse, but I kept going, praying I could make it back to safety. When I staggered into camp, heads turned. Men stared at me with looks I couldn't quite place, half in shock, half in confusion. I must have looked half dead myself, covered in dirt and scratches, my uniform torn and stained. Word traveled fast, and I quickly learned that no one had expected any of us to return. They'd already written off my platoon, assuming we'd been wiped out by Viet Cong forces the night before. I tried to tell them the truth. I told them what I saw, about the floating head with those dead eyes and the terrible way it tore into my friends. But the more I talked, the more people looked at me like I was crazy. A couple of officers tried to calm me down, insisting that I was just in shock, that maybe I'd seen things differently in the heat of the moment. But I knew what I'd seen. Nothing could erase that image from my mind. Later, after I'd finally managed to rest for a few hours, things got strange. I was pulled aside by two men I'd never seen before, both in civilian outfits, carrying themselves like they didn't belong anywhere near the front lines. CIA, they said, though they never showed me any badges or identification. They questioned me about what I'd seen, grilling me over every detail. I repeated my story, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. No, not doubt. Something colder, something dangerous. As they left, I caught a few words whispered between them, just loud enough for me to catch. Silence him. Loose end. My blood ran cold. They didn't believe me, and worse, they thought I was a liability, someone who'd seen too much. And from the look on their faces, they were prepared to do whatever it took to make sure my story never reached anyone else. I didn't wait to see what they'd decide. I slipped out of the tent and moved fast, blending into the base like a ghost. I grabbed only what I needed, moving quietly, listening to every sound around me as I moved further away. As I reached the perimeter, I caught sight of a few soldiers gathering nearby, men I recognized from special operations. Word had spread that they were looking for a traitor, a rogue soldier selling intel to the enemy. Why were they doing so much just to silence a madman? I thought. That's when I realized it. It wasn't that they didn't believe me. They knew. They knew that what I saw was real, and if word went out, it would weaken their war effort. They had to silence me. I turned and ran, disappearing into the dense jungle, my heart pounding as I fought to keep my steps quiet. The underbrush scratched at my arms, the jungle sounds blending with the faint rustle of soldiers moving behind me. They weren't far and they were skilled, but I'd spent enough time out here to know how to move. I pushed further into the wilderness, every step taking me deeper, away from the camp and into the shadows of the jungle. I finally lost them when night came. I had crawled into another tunnel, desperate to survive. Eventually, I found refuge with a group of villagers. They didn't ask questions, just let me stay, and in return I worked for them, living off the land like they did. I adapted, learned to blend in, to forget the soldier's life I once had. But no matter how far I ran, how well I hid, I couldn't escape the memories. Some nights I'd lie awake in the dark, eyes wide, hearing the faint, eerie whispers echo through my mind. I'd see the empty dead eyes of that thing, the terrible way it drifted toward us. And worse, I'd remember the last looks on my friends' faces as they went down, one by one, to that relentless horror. Even now, I never talk about what happened. The villagers think I'm just another lost soldier, hiding from the war. But I can still hear it, somewhere out in the jungle, that cold, terrible sound it made, drifting through the night like a haunting reminder. I'd escaped with my life, but some part of me knew that monster was still out there, waiting, watching, just beyond the edge of the jungle.